If you can hear my voice, you've already done the hardest part of the night. You've stopped. You've let the world become quiet. And now, you don't have to do anything else. Tonight, I'm going to tell you a very old story. It comes from Greece, from a time before clocks, before maps, before any of the noise we carry with us into our beds. The people who first told this story used to sit around fires, the same way you might be lying in bed now, warm, half listening, letting the words drift over them. So that's all you need to do. Let it drift. This is the story of a man named Orpheus. He was a musician, perhaps the greatest who ever lived, and he loved a woman named Eurydice. Their story is about love and loss and one small mistake at the very end, but we'll get to all of that slowly. There's no hurry. If your mind wanders, that's all right. If you fall asleep before the ending, that's all right too. The story will still be here tomorrow. Stories like this one have been waiting thousands of years already. They don't mind waiting a little longer. For now, just let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw unclench. Let the bed hold you. And listen. Now, when I tell you Orpheus was a musician, I want you to understand. This wasn't the kind of skill you and I would recognize. He didn't simply play well. He didn't simply sing in tune. When Orpheus took up his lyre, a small harp shaped a little like a turtle shell, strung with sheep gut, and when he opened his mouth to sing, the world around him began to change. Birds stopped mid-flight to listen. Rivers slowed in their beds, the water hesitating as if it didn't want to be carried away from the sound. Trees that had stood in the same place for 100 years, leaned ever so slightly toward him. And rocks, the old stones in the hillsides, weathered and gray, would shift in the dirt, settling closer to wherever Orpheus sat, as though even stone could feel longing. He played in the mornings, when the mist still lay low in the valleys. He played in the long golden afternoons when the cicadas hummed in the olive groves. He played at dusk, when the first stars came out, and his music seemed to call them down a little nearer to the earth. The people of Thrace grew used to it. They would leave their fields and their kitchens and walk, slowly, toward whatever hill he was sitting on, and they would simply stand there, not speaking, just listening. And when he was done, they would walk home again, and they would not be able to tell you afterward what songs they had heard, only that something inside them, some small, tight thing they hadn't noticed before, had been loosened. There is a story from his youth about a journey he made with the heroes called the Argonauts. They were a band of adventurers, sailing east in search of a golden fleece. Among them were Heracles, the strongest man alive, and Jason, their captain, and many other names that would become legends in their own right. The Argonauts brought Orpheus on board for one reason. They were sailing into dangerous waters. Waters where the sirens lived. The sirens were creatures, half women, half birds, who sat on rocks in the sea and sang to passing sailors. Their songs were so beautiful, so full of promise, that men would steer their ships straight into the jagged stones beneath, just to be closer to the singing. Crew after crew, ship after ship had been wrecked this way. The bones of the lost sailors lay piled on the Sirens' island like driftwood. When the Argo approached those waters, the wind carried the first thin notes of the siren song across the waves. The sailors began to turn their faces. Their hands began to drift from the oars. And then Orpheus took out his lyre. He played louder than the sirens. Not louder in volume, you cannot outshout a song, but louder in beauty. He played a song so warm, so full of homes and harvests and old friends, that the siren song became, by comparison, a thin and hollow thing. The sailors turned back to their oars. The ship cut through the water. They sailed on. This was the kind of musician Orpheus was. The kind whose music could save a ship. But none of that, not the sirens, not the Argonauts, not all the stones leaning toward him in the hills. None of that is why we still tell his story. We tell his story because of a woman. Her name was Eurydice. We don't know very much about her. The old poets who wrote down the myths in the centuries after didn't think it important to tell us. They told us about Orpheus. They told us about his music. They told us about gods and heroes and underworld kings. But about Eurydice herself, what she looked like, what she said, what made her laugh, they left almost no details. So we have to fill her in, the way you fill in a half-remembered dream. Some versions say she was a nymph, a spirit of the wild places, of the forests and streams. Other versions say she was a mortal girl from a village near Orpheus's home. Most agree on this much. She was young. She moved through the world the way young women in the Greek countryside moved, through wildflower meadows, through olive groves, through long, slow afternoons. And she had a way of being. You know the kind of person I mean. The kind whose presence in a room makes everything else feel a little softer. The kind whose laughter is easy but never careless. The kind you can sit beside in silence for an hour and feel that something has been said. That was Eurydice. And Orpheus who could move stones, who could quiet the sea, who could make the stars lean down. Orpheus took one look at her, one afternoon in a sunlit meadow, and he never looked at anyone else again. It was a simple thing. He was walking with his lyre the way he always did. She was gathering flowers, or perhaps just walking herself. Their paths crossed at the edge of a wood. She heard a few notes drift toward her on the wind. She turned. She saw him. He saw her. And whatever they said to each other that day, the old poets don't tell us. Perhaps it doesn't matter. Perhaps it was nothing important. Just the small, ordinary words two people exchange when they realize, suddenly, that their lives have just become permanent. For a long while after that, they were happy. There isn't much more to say about that part. Happiness, when it is real, makes for poor stories. It is mostly silences and small daily kindnesses, and the way two faces look at each other across a fire in the evening. He played for her. He played songs no one else had ever heard because they were only for her. She walked with him in the woods. She listened. Sometimes she would close her eyes while he played, and he would watch her face and feel that he had been put on this earth for one reason, and that reason was now sitting beside him in the grass. They were going to be married. The whole countryside was glad of it. Orpheus the musician and his quiet, gentle Eurydice. The villagers spoke of the wedding for weeks before it came. There would be wine, there would be torches lit at dusk, there would be dancing, and of course there would be music, because there was always music wherever Orpheus walked. The wedding day came on a soft, bright morning in late spring, the kind of morning where the air feels like it's been freshly washed. In ancient Greece, weddings were not the brief, formal affairs we know today. They unfolded over days. There were processions, there were offerings to the gods, there were songs sung to Hymen, the god of marriage himself, asking his blessing on the new household. Hymen was called to Orpheus and Eurydice's wedding, the way he was called to every wedding. The priests lit torches in his name, as was the custom, so that the smoke would carry the prayer up to him on Mount Olympus. And here is where the old story tells us something strange. When the torches were lit for Orpheus and Eurydice, they did not burn cleanly. They sputtered. They threw off black, oily smoke. The flames bent and twisted in directions the wind was not blowing. The older women among the guests, the kind of women who noticed these things, looked at one another and said nothing. But they crossed themselves, in whatever the old Thracian way of crossing themselves was. Bad torches at a wedding were not a small omen. The Greeks believed deeply in omens. The gods were always speaking, if you knew how to listen. Hymen had come, but Hymen had not blessed. If Orpheus noticed, he did not show it. He was looking at Eurydice. She was wearing a long white robe and a wreath of flowers in her hair, and she was looking back at him with that same easy steadiness she always had. And to him, she was the only real thing in the world. The flickering torches were just torches. They were married. There was wine, there was dancing. The villagers laughed and toasted them. The day stretched on into a warm afternoon. Eurydice slipped away from the celebrations with some of her friends, other young women, nymphs by some tellings, or simply the village girls she had grown up with. They wanted a little time in the meadows, a little time to themselves before the long evening of feasting. She kissed Orpheus before she left, a small kiss. A kiss you give someone you are going to see again in an hour. The meadow was beautiful. Tall grass moving in the slow afternoon breeze. Wildflowers, the kind that grow in the Greek hills, blues and yellows and small star-shaped whites. The girls walked together, talking, laughing about whatever girls have laughed about for thousands of years. Somewhere nearby, a stream ran over rocks. Eurydice walked a little ahead of the others. She was always like that, drifting, gentle, not quite in step with anyone else. There is one version of the story, the version Virgil tells, the Roman poet, where another man is also in the meadow that day, a shepherd named Aristeus. He sees Eurydice walking among the flowers, and he is struck by her, the way Orpheus was struck by her, and he begins to follow her. Not menacingly at first, just to catch up, just to speak to her. But she sees him coming, and she is alone, and her bridegroom is not with her, and she turns and begins to walk faster. He walks faster too. She begins to run. And it is while she is running through the long grass, looking back over her shoulder, trying to see how close he is, that her foot comes down on something soft and warm and coiled. In other versions, there is no Aristeus. There is just Eurydice walking with her friends. There is just a snake sleeping in the grass and a foot in the wrong place at the wrong time. There is no villain, just bad luck. Just the kind of small accident that the world delivers without warning on otherwise ordinary afternoons. Either way, the ending is the same. The serpent is startled. It strikes. Its fangs sink into her ankle, just above the bone. Eurydice cries out. Her friends come running. They find her in the grass, pale, her leg already beginning to swell. The poison of the Greek hill vipers is not always fatal. Sometimes a strong young person can survive a bite, but not always, and not this time. By the time they have carried her back toward the village, she can no longer speak. By the time they reach the edge of the woods, where the wedding torches are still burning, she has stopped breathing. Orpheus is told, "I will not pretend to know what that moment was like. Some sorrows the old poets do not even try to describe, because words make them smaller. They only tell us that Orpheus took up his lyre, that he walked out into the hills alone, and that for a long time afterward, days, perhaps weeks, there was no music in Thrace. The people went about their lives. They tried not to listen for it. When the music finally came back, it had changed. Where once Orpheus's songs had been bright, like sunlight on water, they were now low and dark, like wind in a cave. He sang of Eurydice. He sang her name into the wind over and over. He sang of the meadow, the serpent, the white robe and the wreath of flowers. He sang until even the stones in the hills, which had once leaned toward him, now seemed to weep. But singing was not enough. Singing did not bring her back. And so, one morning, the old story tells us, Orpheus stood up from the rock where he had been sitting, and he tuned the strings of his lyre, and he set out walking, south, toward the sea, toward a certain cave in a certain mountain that he had heard of in the old songs. A cave whose mouth opened into the earth itself, and whose floor sloped down and down and down into the kingdom of the dead. He was going to go and get her. To understand what Orpheus was about to do, you have to understand how the Greeks thought about death. They did not think the dead were gone, exactly. They thought the dead were somewhere, a specific somewhere, a place ruled by a god named Hades, the brother of Zeus, a place with rivers and meadows of its own, a place from which no one had ever returned. The way down to it was through certain caves in certain mountains scattered throughout the Greek world. These were known places. Pilgrims left offerings at their entrances, but no one walked in. No living person walked in. Orpheus walked in. The cave was in a mountain in the south, in a region called Taenarum. The locals knew of it. They avoided it. The air around the entrance was always a little colder than it should have been. The plants near it grew thin and gray, as though the cave breathed something out that did not agree with growing things. Orpheus stepped into the dark with his lyre on his back and a small lamp in his hand. For a long time, the slope was gentle. The cave was just a cave. The walls were rough stone, and the floor was uneven, and the only sound was the drip of water somewhere far ahead. The lamp threw a small circle of orange light around him. Beyond it, everything was black. He walked. He walked for an hour, then another, then for what might have been a day, or a week, or only a few minutes. Time inside the cave did not behave the way time behaved outside. The slope grew steeper. The air grew colder. The walls began to glisten, not with water, but with something else. Something that caught the lamplight and shimmered like oil. He kept walking. At last he came to a river. He had been told about this river. Every Greek had heard about this river. It was called the Styx. Black water. So black that the lamp's light did not reflect off its surface. So black that the river looked, at first glance, like a long ribbon of empty space cut into the floor of the cave. On the far side of the river was a country he could not quite see. A gray country, vague at its edges, where dim shapes moved. On this side of the river was a boat, and in the boat was an old man. His name was Charon, the ferryman of the dead. He was as old as the river itself. His back was bent. His beard was long and yellowed and full of cobwebs, as though no living thing had brushed against him in centuries. His eyes were two small black coals set deep in a gray face. He held a long wooden pole in his hands. His job was simple. Souls came to the river. They paid him a coin the living traditionally placed under the tongue of the dead, so they would have it when they arrived, and Charon poled them across to the other side. Souls without a coin had to wait on the bank. Some of them were said to wait there for 100 years, watching the boats come and go, before they were finally led across. Charon did not take living men across. Living men did not come to the river. The very air of his cave was not made for living lungs. And so when Orpheus stepped out of the dark, lamp in hand, the ferryman looked up, slowly, slowly, and his black eyes fixed on the breath rising from Orpheus's mouth, white in the cold. "You are not dead," Charon said. His voice was the sound of two old stones grinding together. "Go back." Orpheus did not go back. Orpheus set down his lamp. Orpheus unslung the lyre from his back, and Orpheus began to play. He played the song he had been carrying in him since the day he stood at the edge of the meadow and was told about the serpent. He sang the wedding morning, the torches that would not burn cleanly. He sang Eurydice's white robe. He sang the small kiss before she walked away. He sang the long, empty weeks afterward. He sang every silence, every meal she did not eat, every place in the house where she should have been. And Charon, old Charon, who had ferried 1,000,000 dead souls across the black water and never once felt anything at all, Charon began to weep. Black tears slid down his gray face and dropped onto the deck of his boat. When the song ended, the ferryman did not speak for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. "Get in," he said. Orpheus got in. The crossing was silent. Charon poled. The black water made no sound against the hull. The gray country on the far side grew slowly closer, and Orpheus saw now that the shapes moving through it were people. Thousands of people. The dead. They walked in slow, drifting crowds, not speaking, not seeming to notice one another. They did not look up when the boat arrived. They did not look at anything. Orpheus stepped out onto the far bank. Charon poled away into the mist without a word. The country of the dead was not what Orpheus had expected. He had expected fire. He had expected demons. He had expected punishment. The Greeks had stories about a place called Tartarus, deep in the underworld, where wicked souls were tormented forever. But Tartarus was not all of the underworld. Tartarus was only one corner of it. Most of the dead, most ordinary, blameless people, did not go to Tartarus. They came to this. A long gray field under a sky with no sun. Wandering, forgetting, slowly over the centuries becoming less and less themselves, until eventually they were only shapes, shapes drifting in the gray light. This was the part of the underworld that frightened the Greeks the most. Not the fire, the forgetting. Orpheus walked among them. He looked into face after face, hoping. None of them was hers. He walked on. He walked toward the center of the underworld, where, he had been told, the palace of Hades stood. The road there was guarded by a creature so famous that even children in Thrace had heard of it. A dog. A very large dog, with 3 heads. His name was Cerberus. He had 3 thick necks and 3 sets of jaws full of long yellow teeth and a serpent for a tail. He sat at the gates of Hades' palace and made sure of one thing. The dead did not leave. They could come in, they could not go out, and no living thing could pass him in either direction. When Orpheus came down the road, Cerberus saw him. All 3 heads rose at once. The fur along all 3 spines stood on end. The growling began low, in 3 different throats at 3 different pitches, weaving together into a sound that did not belong in any natural world. Orpheus stopped walking. He took out his lyre. He played a lullaby, a very old one, a song mothers sang to children in the villages of Thrace to make them sleep. He had heard it from his own mother, perhaps. He had played it for Eurydice on quiet evenings when she was tired and she had drifted off with her head on his shoulder. He played it now in the dim red light at the gates of the dead. The first head, the one in the middle, yawned. The second head, the left, lowered to the ground. The third head, the right, let out a long, soft, sleepy whine, and then it, too, sank. All 3 pairs of eyes closed. Cerberus, the guardian of the underworld, the terror of every dead soul, snored quietly in 3 different tones, like a chord struck on a low pipe. Orpheus walked past him. He did not look back. The palace of Hades was carved out of black stone. It had no windows, because there was nothing outside it worth looking at. It had no fire in its hearths, because the dead do not feel cold. It had 2 thrones in its great hall, and on those 2 thrones sat the king and queen of the underworld. Hades, brother of Zeus, brother of Poseidon, lord of all the dead. He was a tall, pale man with a black beard, dressed in robes the color of the deep night sky. His face was not cruel. It was tired. He had ruled the underworld for longer than the sun had been a sun, and he had seen every kind of grief. And he was not impressed by grief any longer. He had heard every argument, every plea, every reason. He had let no one go. Beside him sat his queen, Persephone. Her story is one for another night, but you should know this much about her. She was a goddess of springtime, of flowers, of green growing things. She had been brought down into the underworld against her will long ago, And now she lived half the year here, in the dark, and half the year above, in the light. The half she spent here was the half we call winter. She sat beside her husband in a robe the color of fresh leaves. Her hair was the gold of late summer wheat. And she watched, with eyes that had not forgotten what it felt like to be alive, as a thin and travel-worn man in a dirty cloak walked into the throne room with a lyre in his hands. Hades looked up. He did not waste words. "You are alive," he said. "You are in the wrong place." Orpheus said nothing. He simply began to play. What Orpheus played in the throne room of Hades is not recorded. The old poets say only that it was the truest song any musician had ever made. He sang Eurydice. He sang the meadow. He sang the serpent. He sang the wedding morning that should have been the first morning of a long life together, and the long emptiness that came instead. He sang the road down, the boatman, the gray field, the sleeping dog. He sang every step it had cost him to stand in this room. And the throne room of Hades, a room that had heard the cries of every dead soul since the beginning of time, a room where weeping was not noticed, where pleas were dismissed without a word. That room fell utterly silent. The dead in the corridors outside stopped their drifting. They turned their heads, the ones who could still remember how to turn their heads, toward the music. The black stone of the walls grew slick with what might have been moisture, or might have been something else. Persephone, on her throne, was weeping openly. And Hades, Lord of the dead, who had not felt a thing in 1,000 years, Hades closed his eyes. When the song was over, no one spoke for a long while. At last, Persephone laid her hand on her husband's arm. She did not say anything. She only looked at him. Hades opened his eyes. He looked at the musician standing in front of him. He looked at the empty room. He looked at his queen. He said, "Take her." Orpheus could not speak. He fell to his knees. "Take her," said Hades, "and go back the way you came. She will follow behind you. She will be a shade until you have both crossed back into the light, and then she will be a woman again." He paused. His face hardened just slightly. The kindness had cost him something, and it would cost him no more. "One condition," he said. "You will walk in front. She will walk behind. You will not turn around. You will not turn your head. You will not look at her. Not once. Not for any reason. Not until both of you have stepped out into the sun. If you turn, if your eyes touch her, even for an instant, before you are both out, she goes back. And this time, she will not return. Not for any song, not for any king, not for any prayer ever spoken on this earth. She will be lost, and you will have lost her twice." Hades leaned forward just slightly on his black throne. "Do you understand?" Orpheus understood. He bowed. He turned. He walked out of the throne room, and behind him, soft as a footfall in deep snow, he heard another footstep follow. He did not look. He walked back down the long corridor, past Cerberus, who was still asleep with all three heads on his paws, twitching in some dim dog dream. Orpheus did not look back. He walked back across the gray fields. He could hear the soft footfall behind him, sometimes a sigh, sometimes the faintest brush of fabric. He did not look back. He came to the river. Charon was waiting. The old ferryman, his cheeks still stained with the black tears from before, said nothing. He poled them across. Orpheus stood in the front of the boat. Behind him he could feel, not see, only feel, a presence, a cold breath, a small weight that might have been a shadow leaning on the gunwale. He did not look back. They reached the far bank. Orpheus stepped off. The footstep followed. He began the long climb back up the cave. The slope was steep now, going up. His legs burned. His lamp was nearly out. The light was so dim he could barely see the wall in front of him, let alone what might or might not be behind him. And here is where the doubt began. He could not hear her breathing. The dead do not breathe. He had known that. He had been told. But still, he listened in the dark for some small living sound. He did not hear it. He heard only the soft footfall, and the soft footfall was very quiet, almost too quiet, almost as though there was nothing there at all. What if Hades had tricked him? What if Hades had let him walk all the way back up to the surface, alone, only to laugh at him from his throne when he reached the sunlight and turned and found no one there? What if she was not behind him? What if she had been behind him and was no longer? The thoughts came in slow and would not leave. They turned in his mind for hours as he climbed, as the slope grew gentler, as the air grew the smallest fraction warmer. He could see the mouth of the cave ahead, a pale gray light, the light of the world, the light of morning. He was almost there. A few more steps, a few more. And here is where the old story breaks every listener's heart, in the same way every time. He turned. He did not mean to. He did not intend to. He had walked all this way, through all of that dark, on the strength of a single rule. Do not look. Do not look. Do not look. And he had not looked. He had not looked through the gray fields. He had not looked across the river. He had not looked past Cerberus. But the cave mouth was right there. The light was right there. He was perhaps 3 steps from the open air, and the silence behind him was so terrible. The silence was so loud. He had to know. He turned his head. She was there, just behind him, Eurydice. Pale, still half a shade, but there. Her face, her eyes, the same eyes that had looked at him across the meadow on the day they met. Her eyes widened, just slightly, the way a person's eyes widen when they realize something they cannot stop. She opened her mouth as if to speak, to call his name maybe, to say anything. But the rule had been broken. A wind came up from below, a cold wind, the wind of the underworld, reaching up the long cave to take back what had been promised. It wrapped around Eurydice. It pulled at her hair, at her robe. She reached out one hand toward him. He reached back. Their fingers almost touched, almost. And then she was gone, pulled back, down the slope, down the long dark, back into the gray country, back across the black river, back into the long forgetting. And this time, as Hades had said, there would be no return. Orpheus stood at the mouth of the cave, alone. He tried to follow. Of course he did. He turned and ran back down into the dark. He stumbled. He fell. He shouted her name. He played his lyre with bleeding fingers until the strings broke. He reached the bank of the Black River, and he waited. But this time, Charon's boat did not come. He waited there for 7 days, the old poets say. He did not eat, he did not sleep. He played, and he wept, and he called. The river was still. The boat did not come. At last, slowly, he turned, and he walked back up the long slope to the world. He stepped out into the sun. He was alone.
What happened to Orpheus after that is told in different ways by different poets. Some say he wandered through Thrace for years playing songs of grief, and that wherever he went the wild animals followed him, and even they were sad. Some say he refused ever again to look at another woman, because no other woman could be Eurydice, and to try to love anyone else felt like a betrayal of the small, doomed thing he had carried out of the dark. Some say he was killed in the end by women who were angry at his refusals. Some say it was the wild revelers of Dionysus, the god of wine, who tore him apart in a frenzy because his music was too sad and did not fit their dances. The most beautiful version, I think, is the one in which his lyre, his small turtle-shell lyre, the one that had moved stones and quieted the sea and put Cerberus to sleep, was thrown into a river after his death, and the river carried it down to the sea, and the sea carried it among the stars, and you can still see it up there if you know where to look. The constellation Lyra, the harp in the sky. And Eurydice? Eurydice is in the gray country, still, walking with the other quiet shapes, forgetting, slowly, all the small things she once knew. The wedding morning, the torches, the meadow, the serpent. But here is something the old poets do tell us. When Orpheus finally died, however he died, when his own soul came down to the bank of the river, and Charon pulled him across without a word, and he walked through the gray fields one last time, she was waiting. She knew him. She had not forgotten him after all. They walked together, the two of them, through the long gray country, and they were not separated again. That is the end of the story. There is no moral to it. The Greeks did not tell stories the way we tell them. They did not always wrap them up. Sometimes they only meant to say, here is something that happened. Here is what love is. Here is what loss is. Here is what we do, all of us, when we are given one rule, one small, impossible rule, and we cannot quite keep it. We turn around. We look. We lose what we cannot bear to lose. And we go on. I hope you are nearly asleep by now. If you are not, that's all right too. The night is long. There is plenty of it left. The story is over. You can let it go now. Let the bed hold you. Let the dark be soft around you. Let your breath slow down to match the slow, slow music, going quieter, going quieter. Good night.